Nestled in the rolling hills of West Feliciana Parish in southeastern Louisiana, Rosedown Plantation is a nearly 200-year-old estate created by Daniel and Martha Turnbull.
This family was very, very rich. They were the Bill Gates family of that period of time, internationally rich. You've got a plantation house that's about 8,000 square feet, extensive gardens that they've probably never seen the equal anywhere.
We have the main house, we have 12 historic outbuildings, 28 acres of formal gardens, and 90% plus of original furnishings.
The Turnbulls' immense wealth could not protect them from the perils of disease, everyday tragedies, and the Civil War. Martha Hillard Barrow and Daniel Turnbull both had wealthy parents. Martha's parents, William Barrow II and Farabee Hillard Barrow, owned Highland Plantation, a 4,300-acre estate planted mostly in cotton. At that time, cotton was referred to as white gold. Daniel's parents, John Turnbull and Catherine Rucker Turnbull, got rich trading slaves, fur, livestock, food, and indigo. John traveled continuously, shifting goods and slaves among buyers and sellers between Natchez, Mississippi and Mobile, Alabama. The Turnbulls garnered huge profits. Daniel inherited part of his father's wealth. 29-year-old Daniel married 19-year-old Martha in 1828.
Befitting the children of wealthy parents, they spent their honeymoon trip in Europe, the great gardens of France, England, Italy. They were all there. Martha got many of her ideas from these historic gardens.
We know she went to Versailles, and she probably talked with several of their landscape gardeners there. She found the symmetrical gardens, the very formal gardens. She saw the parterres.
The Turnbulls delighted over the 250 acres of formal gardens surrounding the palace at Versailles. Martha and Daniel were inspired by the magnificent estate that had served as home to King Louis XIV and other French royalty.
Martha and Daniel were very wealthy. All the grandeur in Europe, they could have easily decided to come back and have some of that here in Louisiana.
They did return home after their honeymoon trip. That was when Daniel made a series of 7 land purchases over the next few years, eventually totaling almost 3,500 acres.
Martha quickly began landscaping, planting dozens of live oak trees, 35 feet apart. As Martha's trees took root, designs were drawn up for this 2-story mansion, complete with 12 huge columns and 2 small ones. The cypress columns were reportedly harvested from the grounds at Rosedown and then hand-turned by slaves. The house would have 6 bedrooms and 3 porches, 2 out front, 1 upstairs, and 1 downstairs. A 3rd porch would be built out back. Observers believe the couple designed the house themselves because of similarities between Rosedown and Martha's childhood home, Highland Plantation.
Rosedown has a very unusual plan in that it doesn't have a central hallway that extends front to back through the entire width of the home. That was a very standard plan for this time because of the cross ventilation that the hallway would provide. That was their air conditioning. Rosedown has a formal entry hall backed by a very formal dining room, which in effect cuts that central space in half. But if you've been to Highland, you see that they have that same plan.
Daniel did make arrangements for the air circulation. There's a half window that you can raise and a half door underneath the window that you can open. In most of the rooms, they have fireside cupboards on either side of the chimney. There is also a pair of built-in bookcases in one of the rooms. And these are features you don't normally see in houses from that time period. The Turnbulls hired a builder to turn their blueprints into reality. The vast majority of the construction was done by slaves.
They built a sawmill when they first began construction on the house so they could mill their own lumber. Most of the lumber that went into the construction of the house was taken from the Rosedown acreage. Well, they had their own brick foundry. Most of the bricks that were used to build the foundations of the houses and the outbuildings were all made here.
The Turnbulls added built-in china cabinets. They added a kitchen behind their home, just as most homeowners of their generation did. Family records show that Daniel and Martha spent $13,109 on building supplies alone. But those supplies may have been less than half the materials used in the house.
At its height, Rosedown had a total slave population of 444. Many of these slaves had been inherited by Daniel from his father. Martha got some from her family, but many of them were purchased by Daniel here.
It took only about 6 months to build the house, with construction beginning in November of 1834 and finishing in early May 1835. It was an enormous feat given some of the details in the house, including 9 fireplaces, 3 of which are encased in imported black marble.
It's Carrara marble that was imported from Italy, and it was very expensive at the time.
It took months for the Turnbulls to get their shipments of wallpaper from France. The couple also purchased fancy drapes and rugs and floor cloths. Daniel and Martha bought $925 worth of new furniture, including 4 beds from Philadelphia. That same furniture would have cost them about $18,000 today.
A French-born cabinet maker by the name of Anthony Curvell designed the very first shipment of furniture for Rosedown. Curvell carved almost exclusively in mahogany. Anything that's upholstered is upholstered in black horsehair.
The Turnbulls had already purchased some furniture to accommodate their growing family. The shipment included bed steps for their 2 children, 6-year-old William and 4-year-old Sarah.
We have the Turnbull family cradle, and that was the cradle that all the children in this house slept in as babies. That's probably the oldest piece that we have in the house. There is also a toddler's spool bed, which is in the nursery.
Martha ordered china and silverware that was fitting for her magnificent home.
The old Paris porcelain. It's a really pretty floral set with a pink border. They had at least 2 different kinds of silver flatware. They had a dessert set, which was by Odio Silver of France, and they had a set that was for daily usage, which was fiddle thread pattern.
Some of my favorite pieces are the Baccarat crystal champagne glasses that she got in France. And they're a beautiful cranberry color, and they're bowl-shaped at the top and fluted at the bottom. And there's a lovely Capodimonte punch bowl with cupids all around the side, and it has beautiful colors. And there's a fruit set with the plates having hand-painted flowers, and the plates and the tiered stands for the fruit are trimmed in Napoleon green.
The Turnbulls were not only proud of their home, they were also beginning to take pride in the grounds. Their live oaks were growing beautifully, but they had also, no doubt, set out some valued treasures they had been holding on to since their honeymoon 7 years earlier now.
We know that they bought statuary and brought it back with them. That's what really gives this garden a European feel, of the beautiful marble statues.
With furniture in place, the walls adorned with beautiful paper and drapes, and beautiful chandeliers hanging, the Turnbulls were ready to celebrate the completion of their new home. They invited 30 guests. Martha prepared the menu.
She had 6 chickens, 2 turkeys, 2 ducks, 1 ham, 1 tongue, roast mutton, 1 pig, 12 dozen eggs, 28 bananas, 6 pineapples, 2 hogshead of ice. That was lake ice that had been shipped down from up north. 4 decanters of wine, 4 decanters of brandy, and 8 bottles of champagne.
Slaves then went to work preparing the huge feast over a fireplace.
To cook on this hearth, you cook down hearth as well as cooking with pots hanging on the crane over the fire. You shovel coals out of the fire and place them down hearth and create burners.
Pots and pans were placed over the blazing fire or on hot coals to bake, boil, or fry the meats, vegetables, breads, and desserts. The meal was then delivered to the main house and served on this table. A slave child operated the new punka, or shoe fly, above the dining room table.
During the early 19th century, they did not have screens for their windows. So when the hotter months of the year came along, windows were all open, insects would have free rein. You would actually have a slave child at the wall, pulling the cords which would operate the punka. The breeze would shoo the flies away.
The party celebrating the completion of Rosedown was just the first of many parties to be held at Rosedown. Martha loved company. She also loved to show off her gardens that had been evolving for 5 years before construction began on the house.
Martha most likely saw camellias and azaleas in England. They would have been grown as hothouse camellias by the very wealthy who could afford beautiful glass conservatories that were warmed with smoke pots and things like that.
The camellias and azaleas are native to China and could not be grown outside in England because of its cold climate. Martha soon discovered the shrubs thrived outdoors in South Louisiana. She also learned how to root her own plants.
She propagated them on a large-scale basis, and we still have her original propagation shed that she used to propagate her camellias, her sweet olives, her azaleas, her boxwoods that she formed beautiful formal parterre gardens with.
Martha also grew gardenias and roses. As the lady of the house, she was very deliberate in how and where she planted all of her foliage, involved in every detail herself. The gardens she saw in Europe were always top of mind.
The English is more of a cottagey, informal garden. It's kind of a patchworky, just bold use of color. And then the French style comes in through the axis that you see. The same thing's done on one side is done on the other. If you look from a balcony, you can really see the very formal, symmetrical style of the gardens. She also built a rockery, which is very unique. And what this rockery kind of symbolizes is the ruins that she saw in Europe.
Martha created brick and gravel paths leading from one location to the next. As she watched her garden and trees grow, she added to her family. A third child, James Daniel, was born in 1836, giving the couple 2 boys and a girl. Martha's growing family did not, however, interfere with her love of entertaining.
There was a beautiful glass conservatory, very Victorian looking, that was behind me, that is now in ruins. We just have one remaining wall. And this conservatory was filled with orange trees, lemon trees, different types of citrus, beautiful jasmine vines that were very fragrant, pineapples, and all sorts of exotic orchids. And she would have held musical productions there, little small intimate dinner parties, tea parties.
As frequent guests strolled through Martha's growing garden, they often found new structures, including a sunken glass greenhouse. This is where Martha kept her seedlings until they became strong enough to survive South Louisiana's hot summers and cold winters. Other buildings were added as well, including a milk house.
We have the wood shed, which would have been used to store the supplies of cut wood. We also have the ladies' privy, which was the outhouse, 3 summer houses, also known as gazebos, a garden barn, which would have been where Martha stored the larger of her equipment that she used for the gardens.
She had a vision of what she wanted, and she was very aggressive in gaining what she wanted. I picture Martha and Daniel sitting at the supper table and Martha saying, "I need another 4 acres for another garden," and Daniel thinking, "Oh, I've got to give up another 4 acres of cotton."
The Turnbulls made another extravagant addition to their home in 1841.
The Chickering Square Grand was ordered by Daniel. It's called a square grand because it was a style that was invented by the Chickering Company that had a smaller size, but it also had almost grand piano sound. It was either designed by Jonas or one of his direct sons.
The Turnbulls not only enjoyed their own home, they had other outlets as well. They sometimes took advantage of Martha's brother's boat for trips to New Orleans and for hunting excursions. The vessel was equipped with stables for 12 horses and 6 packs of dogs. The Turnbulls and their children also took trips almost annually to Saratoga, New York, a place that offered a respite against Louisiana's hot summers. Saratoga was known even then for horse racing, a sport Daniel enjoyed. The family skipped their regular trip to Saratoga in the summer of 1843. It proved deadly for the couple's young son, 7-year-old James Daniel. He died that summer of yellow fever.
His death was such a source of trauma to the family that Daniel hired a full-time doctor here. building his office very close to the main house, so the doctor would always be nearby in case there was another medical emergency with one of his 2 remaining children. But the doctor also took care of all the slaves on site, too.
Despite grappling with the loss of his youngest child, Daniel Turnbull had to stay focused on his business ventures.
Rosedown was considered the home plantation, but he did own 3 others, and he managed a total of 8 plantations. So his business affairs were becoming quite extensive, and we think he wanted a formal office library. So he added the office library on the south side of the house.
Not only did the new library give Daniel more workspace, it also provided a place to house his hundreds of books. Researchers say he may have had the largest private collection of books in Louisiana during his time. Numbering around 400, Daniel added a north wing to his house to balance the south wing. This new addition proved useful when Daniel's acquaintance, Henry Clay, lost the 1844 election for President of the United States to James K. Polk. Crawford Riddell had built an exquisite set of furniture for Clay to take with him to the White House. Clay's defeat caused the bedroom set to be put up for sale. Daniel decided it would be a wonderful addition to his new bedroom, though it would be a tight fit.
The set was immense. The bed itself was 13 feet 8 inches tall. It just about brushed the ceilings in those 14-foot 3-inch tall wings. The entire set consisted of the bed, an armoire, a dressing bureau, 2 washstands, a cheval mirror, and 6 chairs.
Money was not a factor for such extravagance. Daniel's plantations were only a few miles from the Mississippi River, which over the course of hundreds of years changed courses and flooded, causing soil in the vicinity to be very fertile. The long growing season in South Louisiana also benefited the Turnbulls. They were among the 38 wealthiest plantation owners in the South.
You can have 3 to 4 growing seasons in a year, as opposed to just the 2 growing seasons that you would get up in the northern states. Basically, a couple of good cotton crops, and he was a millionaire.
Not only did the Turnbulls have a grand lifestyle, they also loaned large amounts of money to others in the community. The couple brought in tutors for their surviving children, Sarah and William Barrow. They took their children with them when vacationing at various American resorts and when traveling abroad. Both Sarah and William were popular in social circles. In May of 1853, 23-year-old William married Caroline Swanwick Butler, the great-great-granddaughter of Martha Washington.
I've always heard stories that Kara was a little bit spoiled. She was very pretty, and I'm sure she was from a very prestigious family, as was Sarah. Sarah probably had a lot more responsibility of helping to upkeep Rosedown.
Caroline brought with her to Rosedown one of her grandmother's treasures, this needlepoint fireplace screen stitched by Martha Washington or her granddaughter Nellie Custis. The bliss of William and Caroline's marriage was short-lived because of a tragic accident in 1856 involving William.
He was in Old River in a pleasure boat with 2 friends and a servant, and a wind came up and flipped the boat over, and he and the servant drowned, and the 2 friends escaped.
He was to be the heir to Rosedown, which left their daughter Sarah as the primary heir.
Within months of the funeral, William's wife Caroline left Rosedown with their 2 children, never to return. Sarah's days of being an eligible Southern belle would soon be over. Less than 6 months after William's death, she married James Bowman from the nearby Oakley Plantation. The marriage was reason for additional construction at Rosedown.
I think that Daniel and Martha decided to build that wing out back so that they would have a place to retire, turning the main house over to Sarah and James so that Sarah and James could begin their family.
The young couple may have exceeded expectations, filling the house with children.
Sarah did have 10 children, but Sarah's 10 were actually born over the span of about 17 years. So as they grew up, they would go away to boarding school, they would get married. They were probably never all 10 ever living in the house at any one time.
Daniel did not live to see but 4 of his grandchildren. He died in October of 1861. Just 6 months after the first cannons were fired, marking the beginning of the Civil War.
All we know from family papers is that he had suffered from a long illness
James Bowman went off to fight for the Confederacy. While he was away, Union soldiers showed up at Rosedown.
They found only women and children here. They found a house, gardens, garden-related outbuildings that couldn't be considered of any kind of strategic value to the Confederacy, and I think that's why they left the house and the gardens alone. We do believe that they burned the slave cabins at that time as a way of symbolically freeing the slaves.
While the house and gardens were spared by the Civil War, they still went into decades of decline. Most of the family's money had been put into their home and into slaves to work the fields. The Turnbulls also loaned heavily to other plantation owners and farmers in the community. Some didn't make it back from the war. Other farmers who didn't go off to war were now penniless. On top of that, the freed slaves started expecting pay for their work.
Martha would actually barter with them. She would give them like a pound of coffee or a pound of sugar, that sort of thing, to do a certain amount of work. Later on, Martha got into a sharecropping sort of situation where she would actually exchange rent for land with her former slaves to do work around the house and gardens.
Sharecropping often proved contentious, as revealed in this letter from an overseer.
The hands are not willing for you and Mr. Bowman to shit their cotton. They won't give any reason. Torres has furnished them with bags, ties, and twine to put their cotton.
Despite the frustrations of helping to manage her plantation, Martha was able to enjoy the beauty of Rosedown with her grandchildren. She continued to pass down her values and wisdom as they went away to boarding school and college.
My dear Nina and Corey, I must write a letter and beg that you both at once commence to do all the other girls do, to contribute to your health and spirits. Don't sit in your room so much. Go out into the fresh air, dance, sing, romp, enter into all these pleasures. You're both too young to be such old women. Be gay girls, talk with everybody.
Martha died in 1896 at the age of 87. By then, Sarah had been very well trained to become the matriarch of the family. She and her children lived up to Martha's expectations.
They listened to the radio a lot, and so they kept up with worldwide events. And then they had a lot of visitors. People loved to come and talk to them. And they had a cousin who lived at Oakley, and he would ride his horse into town every day and get the mail and pick up all the news and then come back and relay all the local happenings to them.
But the best of times appear to have been with family around the dining room table.
My mother said as a child they always went there for holidays. She said there were probably 4 generations sitting around the table, and that the meals were just wonderful. There was always 7 courses, and she said they lasted for 3 hours. My mother didn't like to sit still, but she said she always was glad to sit still and behave at the table at Rosedown because the food was so good and she didn't want to miss a bite of it. But if she did not show perfect manners, Sarah would always very discreetly correct her.
Sarah lived to be 83 years old. Her husband James died 13 years later at the age of 95. Sarah willed her family home to her 4 unmarried daughters, who also devoted their lives to Rosedown.
They continued to raise as much of a cotton crop as they could until the boll weevil came through and wiped out the ability to produce large-scale cotton.
That was in the early 1900s. The Bowman sisters were forced to find other ways to generate money.
The 1930s were the time when tourism started to come into its own, and a lot of people were traveling from the north to the southern regions and seeing all these wonderful plantation homes. So the Bowman sisters decided to take advantage of that, and they actually opened Rosedown for public tours. They would charge, I believe, $0.25 per person to let people into the house to see the entry hall, the parlor, the dining room, maybe the library. And then they sold cuttings from the gardens, some of Martha's original plantings. They sold postcards. They had postcards made, and they sold that.
Even though my great aunts could have lived much easier had they sold some land or sold some of the furnishings, I think they just felt like it was a tribute to their families to hold on to this.
The money the sisters earned didn't come close to being enough to maintain the house or the gardens. They, however, did their best to preserve and pass on their parents' way of life.
Aunt Nina was the one that I think seemed to like the outside the most, and she would take care of the ducks and the chickens and the plants, and Aunt Bella sort of took care of the inside of the house. The gardens then looked nothing like they look now. They were very overgrown, as was the house, badly in need of repair. But, you know, it was just a family home. It was kind of fascinating. It was sort of like being in the secret garden.
The last of the Bowman sisters, Nina, died in 1955. The Turnbull descendants decided it was time to put Rosedown in the hands of someone who could restore the place to its original grandeur.
There was significant damage to the house, just in terms of deterioration, water damage, insect damage in terms of boring bees, carpenter bees.
In 1956, Catherine Fondren Underwood from Houston, Texas came in and purchased the plantation. She hired a full staff of world-renowned professionals to restore the site. It was said to be one of the most expensive private restorations in history.
Mrs. Underwood opened the home to the public after 8 years of painstaking work. She and her husband Milton oversaw the house and grounds until their deaths. Their son David took over Rosedown for more than a decade before selling it to Gene Slivka. The Slivka era proved to be the most challenging for Rosedown. He forced the descendants of Rosedown slaves to pay for land their church had been built on almost 100 years earlier. Anonymous donors came up with most of the money. Slivka took away the beautiful marble statues Martha Turnbull brought home with her from Europe on her honeymoon. He also sold some small decorative pieces from the house, some of which have been recovered. Slivka's most controversial move, however, was to sell off the Henry Clay bedroom set.
We still have about 90% of the original furniture still in the house today, but that was the most significant loss of the original furniture because of the history behind it.
Some fear we may never know how many valuable plantation records Slivka removed from Rosedown. Louisiana leaders quickly stepped in to the rescue when they saw the house and property being dismantled. The state purchased the house and 371 acres of land for $5.7 million. The state didn't purchase the original statues, but Slivka agreed to pay for 8 replicas. Despite the losses,
It's considered to be probably the most intact southern plantation complex in the country. You'll find big houses in many places. You'll find a few historic gardens. You'll find some associated outbuildings, but rarely will you find it all in one place.
23,000 people from all over the world visit Rosedown each year to see how the Turnbulls and their descendants lived, and how their home and gardens live on.
We stand here today after 170 years of history at Rosedown. What is it going to be like in 270 years or 370 years? What a value is that going to be to the children learning the history of the cotton plantations, the Florida parishes, West Feliciana Parish?
To order a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or write to LPB Business Office at 7733 Perkins Road, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70810. You may also visit our website at www.lpb.org.